Okay, so this is the vlog for June 7th. I just looked at that. Anyway, um, spent another day working on Dungeons and Dragons related stuff. Having all this free time, this has actually not been the worst idea. So I must have spent well over $100 on Warframe right at the end of my contract when I should have been saving money. And while I've spent quite a bit of money on um, Dungeons and Dragons stuff right now, that is actually probably financially smarter than buying a bunch of new video games, and definitely smarter than buying a bunch of new Gundam models or Transformers or whatever. Because I'm trying to cut down on the amount of space I'm taking up, and I'm also trying to cut down on spending in general. So buying one book that's $50 and then spending days upon days, probably going to be more like weeks by the end of this, fiddling around with this, uh, it's really a great way of spending my time. I'm being very creative. I'm getting a lot of cool ideas that I can explore. And then I can go and spoil it all by being very, very, uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Stupid. Yeah, that's a good word for it. So I got it in my head that I wanted to create a couple pantheons. There are lots of gods in Dungeons and Dragons, which is one of the reasons it got such a bad rap as a satanist's toolkit way back in the 80s and 90s. The idea is that this is a fantasy world and it evokes a lot of classical mythology, such as Greek or Roman or Nordic or Egyptian, um, you know, gods and goddesses. Because anybody with any kind of a bachelor's degree this day knows anybody that goes to the movie knows that Thor is the god of thunder and Loki is the god of mischief. Um, Anybody that remembers something like Clash of the Titans could tell you the names of a bunch of Greek gods. Zeus throws lightning bolts. Um, Darn it. Sorry about that. Stop beeping. I thought I muted this too. Okay. There we go. So, where was I? Yeah, so what I did today was try and come up with a pantheon that incorporated all of the different domains of clerical power in the core rule book, but in a way such that there was there were three um, domains per god. So 7 gods with 3 domains. So a total of 21 domain options. It's complicated. What complicated it even more, and what ended up causing me to spend hours on it, is that I decided to set up a little heptagram and put all these spheres of influence on it, and then put the different gods and what they symbolized in such a way that you had a god, and then you had the 2 spheres of influence, and then across was another sphere of influence that they also had association with. There's no reason for it. I only did it because I wanted a sense of symmetry. And when you do things like this, you can't be completely symmetric. I had it in my head that there was a symmetry in the original D&D games, where if you had the classic 4-player party of a fighter, a rogue or thief, depending on what you called it, a wizard, and a cleric, your party was balanced. Everybody had a role. Everybody would have equal amounts of fun fulfilling the role they wanted to choose. And it was when you started to incorporate things like bards and rangers and sorcerers and paladins and warlocks and all these more weird specialized classes with extra abilities to keep track of, that the game got complicated. Well, the truth of the matter is, 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons was wildly imbalanced, like to a level I had no comprehension of. How, you might ask yourself? The wizard. Yeah, the guy with a book with 4 hit points at level 1 that dies if a goblin sneezes on him. That character if allowed to level up, if they stay at the back of the party and get full protection from everybody else, and they're casting spells and helping out their buddies, once you get that ball rolling, they are an unstoppable killing machine in 3rd edition and in 3.5. I don't know if they ever addressed that in Pathfinder, which was essentially the 3.5 rule set licensed to another company, but it became such a point of contention that I heard stories of people who were running campaigns where they prevented wizards from being a class, or you were only ever allowed to go to a certain level in wizard, and then you had to take levels in other classes just to keep them from getting as powerful as they could be. To give you some sense of an idea, what they can do at maximum level, they can cast Wish 4 times in a row if they have the money, and they have other spells that will basically just generate money for them ad infinitum. So the whole system, everything put in place to limit their ability, is completely broken by their ability. And so far, from what I'm seeing, they're not necessarily as bad as they were in 3rd edition. They still have access to a lot more spells at maximum level than any other spellcasting class. But those spells don't, at glance at least, seem to be the sort of game-breaking, rule-warping shenanigans that the 3rd edition wizards were capable of doing. 3rd edition was made to sort of not necessarily simplify, but give Dungeons and Dragons a fresh coat of paint. They did, I don't think simplify is the right word. I think a better term might be optimized. In the original Dungeons and Dragons and the 2nd edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, when you wanted to hit an enemy, you had to keep in mind something called the THAC-0 or THAC-0, which stood for to hit armor class 0, which was just a number that was determined by your character's level that said what number you had to roll on a 20-sided die in order to hit an enemy of armor class 0. And then, if you weren't fighting an enemy with armor class 0, say you were fighting an enemy with armor class 5, you just subtracted 5 from the number you needed to roll. Eventually, somebody realized that was really, really stupid, and they came up with a much simpler system in Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition. Most armor classes start at 10 for a regular unarmored humanoid character. They get penalties if they're unable to move with their full faculties, and they get bonuses if they are agile or are wearing armor. So let's say you have leather armor and a shield. That takes your base armor class of 10, improves it by 2 for having the leather armor, and then by 1 for having the shield because it's a small shield. Now your armor class is 13. To hit that person, you need to roll 13 or better on a 20-sided die. On the other hand, a character with weapon training or very good scores in strength or dexterity can use those numbers to improve their roll. So let's say you have to roll 13 or better, which is less than half likely on a 20-sided dice. Well, if you're a fighter using a longsword and you're very, very strong, you can swing that sword very fast. You have a +4 to hit based on your ability score and a +2 based on your training, which ends up for a +6 total. So now you roll the d20, you get a 10, but you add 6. So 16 is better than 13, you hit the character. You don't have to keep track of a THAC-0 chart to figure that out. So they streamlined some of the rules, they optimized some of the rules, but they did not make the game simpler. 3rd edition introduced tons of extra feats, features of the characters that weren't normally available, which was good in a lot of cases because fighters basically didn't do anything but see their numbers improve as they became, higher level and more powerful. Whereas the wizard was just adding spells left and right to their spell book and doing all sorts of crazy stuff while everybody else watched and kind of went, cool. So, I don't remember what I was talking about. I remember symmetry. I remember complicating things needlessly is something I'm trying to avoid and something I hope that they've been trying to avoid with 5th edition. And so far, it does seem like what they're trying to do is do what they were doing with 3rd edition, but without a lot of extra stuff that you needed to keep track of. a lot less flipping back and forth in the book to figure out where you need to, find the information to do the thing you want to do. Most of it is included right in the section for making your character, and it's very simple. The only thing that takes a lot more explanation, obviously, is the magic, which takes up half the book, but that's the way it's been for every Dungeons and Dragons game, so that wasn't a big surprise. So now my only real quandary is, when I'm done with this video, do I go and buy the Dungeon Master Guide and the Monsters Manual and have them shipped to me, because I found out you can get them for less than $40, sometimes less than $30 online. Well, at least it's not $100 in Warframe. I'm Eric Spornitz, and tomorrow will be better.